Hello and welcome back, everyone. We're on day 3 of the Center for Racial Justice Summer Institute 2022. Today's sessions are collectively titled Reverberations of Unending War, Enacting Anti-Imperialist Solidarity in the Korean Diaspora. For more information on the Summer Institute, go ahead and check out the CRJ website, link in chat. For this afternoon session, which is also our closing session for the entire Summer Institute, it's called Liberatory Study to End the Korean War. We'll run for about 2 hours and wrap up around 3. Today, members of the Ending of the Korean War Teaching Collective, who spoke with us all this morning, sharing their syllabus in a launch event, will engage in dialogue and reflection with Juyeon Rhee. So I'll hand it now over again to CRJ Director Christine Hong to introduce Juyeon and the event.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the closing session of the Summer Institute. We are so glad to be in conversation with someone that I think many of you know and admire and love, Juyeon Rhee. So in this session, the members of the Ending the Korean War Teaching Collective, we're going to engage in conversation and in critical reflection with Juyeon Rhee, who was formerly the principal coordinator for the organization Nodutdol for Korean Community Development, their grassroots political education and exposure trips to both North and South Korea. We will be speaking with Juyeon about the role of anti-imperialist Hakseup in fostering international solidarity within the diaspora. And I just want to say that what goes by the title singularly of KEEP, or the Korea Education and Exposure Program, KEEP has enabled many generations of Koreans within the diaspora to engage with progressive and left organizations in South Korea and to visit North Korea as part of peace delegations. And some of the questions that we're going to be asking are, what is the role of Hakseup in fostering international solidarity against imperialism? What have been, what are the challenges? And what strategies have been effective and why? Just an occasion for reflection. And what role can those of us who are in the diaspora and not part of the diaspora as well, what can we all of us who are in the Zoom space, what role can we play within a transnational anti-imperialist movement to end the Korean War? And so Juyeon is very modest, but I will do an introduction and ask Juyeon to speak more about herself. She's a first generation Korean immigrant. She's a long time, very, very famous grassroots organizer who's worked for decades on demilitarization, peace, and unification in Korea. She has been a member of Nodutdol since 2000 and is currently on the board. She formerly served as the main organizer of Nodutdol's KEEP program, which educates and sends Korean Americans, but also Koreans throughout the diaspora to North and South Korea. And I like this addition to her bio, who then returned home, resolved to work for peace and social justice. She's also led Nodutdol's Korean language program, study groups on Korea and US militarism in Asia and the Pacific, as well as Nodutdol's peace treaty campaign. So she also has a prior history to this. I'll just also mention that she holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from SUNY and a JD from Brooklyn Law School, and as an associate degree in science from the massage therapy program at Swedish Institute in New York. I'm just going to add one other thing too, which is that, everyone who knows Juyeon well knows that in terms of the landscape in which we have moved, different people bring different strengths, right? And some people are really good at coming up with ideas and, sort of like running with those. And other people have just, everyone has a spectrum of strengths. Some people are really good at culture work. And I've always noted that Juyeon from the very outset has been so amazing at working with people. I mean, there's something to be said about someone who can knit people together, who foster a sense of profound community. Yeah, I'll just mention that. And I would like to begin and start us off in terms of our conversation. And this is going to be an open conversation. So at any moment, if you want to chime in, if you want to follow up on something that's being asked, feel free to do so. We have questions that we have developed, but you can feel free to interject, especially if it's if you want to participate in a conversation that's immediately at hand, a topic that's immediately at hand. So feel free to jump in either through the chat or by unmuting yourselves. We really do want this to be a conversational space. But Juyeon, I wanted to begin by asking you to speak about your own organizing trajectory. Can you speak about your own sort of development as, as an activist and organizer? And, like Nodutdol is a stepping stone, right? And there were many stepping stones to the stepping stone. And can you speak about those?
Hi, my name is Juyeon. I am not sure, but Christine gave me a little bit of a too glorious portrait. I am just one of many anti-imperialist peace organizers. And okay, so I came to US in 1988 and I went into college in 1987. And I'm sure if you're familiar with the Korean history, in 1987, there were a June democratic uprising of people. And when I entered the college in March, I had no idea that I was living in a dictatorship state. And then I had to, I was dragged into a Hakseup team where I learned of a totally new framework of where I was living. That's a sort of a political Hakseup that I first experienced. And I experienced at the time of really shattering of breaking of what I believed that the world that I was living in. And I was really shocked to learn about the Gwangju massacre in Korean history, of all the rallies and beating, police brutality was happening on the street that I never seen on the news. That's what motivated me. So as the Juyeon years, the screen says, I stayed angry for whole entire that period. Getting angry was a motivation for me to keep on studying more and to know more, to question everything that I thought I knew. And then I was like, is that really the truth? So that was my start. And then I came to the US, to the belly of the beast, quote unquote. And I was first asking, why do I have to go? But because of the family immigration, that I was also again dragged into it. And then first I started with immigrants' rights and civil work. And then, we were thinking about the racial justice and all that. And then I moved on to a diasporic community work, because in 2002, I went to North Korea. There was another breaking of my world experience. 2002, my first trip to North Korea was really horrible, actually, in a sense that, I really didn't know what to believe anymore. And I realized how much I thought I was progressive and I did all the study, but the things that I thought I knew, I wasn't sure if that's really the truth or not. So keep asking the question of, do I believe what this person is saying in North Korea? Do I believe what I see? Or is there something else in behind, as I was told? That roller coaster of emotions made me to come back and say, I really need more structured study. Then I started it. We didn't have this open access ending the Korean War teaching collective syllabus at the time. So, I reached out to everyone I knew. And I said, I need to know about the Korean history. And I need to know, I guess, in English too, so that, we can do a popular education materials too. So I read a lot of Korean history books. One of them actually was Martin Hart Landsberg book on the, and the Korean history division and US policy. And then I was able to connect. And then along the way, I learned that, US foreign policy has a lot to do with it. So then I had to learn about the defense budget and how those are working. And then I also had to learn about what's happening in Philippines and how does it connect to Korea. So I went into the series of different political Hakseup, or to the political study. And that's where, that's where I am. That made up where I am right now, I guess. And I'm still doing a lot of study on, I did a lot of other studies about free trade agreements. Very recently, I did the studies about how does economic sanction work. So because I need to know in order for me to keep on doing the campaign work and to make sure, how, in order for us to really stop the war, not even going into the radical peace or like, relative, like ending the war, there has to be a lot of different steps that we need to go and I need to study about. What is Hakseup is the question that, I guess generally we need to answer. Well, Hakseup, I think for me, as I said, is unlearning. It's a political unlearning and learning simultaneously. So we need to know, when I read the first study aimed at fostering not just learning, but more critically collective liberation, I said, wow, that's a great definition about Hakseup. Hak is a study and sup is a practice. So Hakseup means you practice what you study, or you study in order to practice. So those are very dialectically connected words. And so first definition, I think, is unlearning of what we thought we knew, or unlearning of what we thought was true. We have to unlearn first, and then we need to learn actually what actually the reality is. And then the second one is, definition-wise, I think Hakseup is something that will make you uncomfortable and feel challenged. That because we are living in such a material wealth, so to speak, comparatively speaking, that when you are seeing that because of our wealth is actually built upon somebody else's blood and sweat, that makes you uneasy. That makes you an aid. It's an aiding and abetting of the crime that our state is committing. And what's your choice now? Are you going to fight against it, or are you going to remain silent? Do we have an option? these are like, what Hakseup does, I think, to make you realize that, you cannot remain silent anymore. Another way that Hakseup is really, really important and different, I guess, or maybe in a institutional setting, is that Hakseup comes with an action plan. What are you gonna do now? Now I know that US is behind maintaining the division on the Korean Peninsula, and US is actively pursuing those policies. What am I gonna do? Who else is out there that I can work with? So in the political Hakseup, and as an ultimatum that you need to do something. You need to do something to do the justice. So I think in a social justice setting, Hakseup is all the studies that we need to do. But because we were told by the main society or main media, it's such a distortion of the truth, or omission of the truth. So a lot of times that we need to actively seek, and actively seeking that we need to learn. So I think my life can be also determined, also be described as a journey of my political Hakseup, where what am I really working on right now is can be explained as what book I am reading right now, type of thing.
I think it's so interesting to think, Juyeon, during the lunch break, for those of us who are on the West Coast, some of us who are part of the collective were chatting with Juyeon during that interval between the morning session, this afternoon session. And Juyeon was teasing us because she said, what am I going to say to a bunch of educators? But the fact of the matter is that education in these higher institutions of learning, if you were to say, okay, what you do, in the university's political education, you would have like every anti-CRT person it would be viewed as impermissible because there's the fiction that somehow, although there's applications of knowledge, that could be, like a patent or something like that, or with, R&D for the military industrial complex, even though there's applications of knowledge, there's this fiction that knowledge should be somehow neutral, that it cannot be instrumentalized. And somehow like Hakseup really beautifully conjoins the idea that that study and action are indissociable. They cannot be, sort of stripped from each other. And but it also goes to the shortcomings of the kinds of education that gets prioritized in university spaces and the hostility of university spaces to political education. And so I just wanted to point that out. But Monica, would you like to pose a question?
Sure. Juyeon, thank you so much for laying all of that out so powerfully. One thing that maybe folks in this Zoom room would kind of benefit from is, would you be able to tell us a little bit more in terms of Hakseup, right? So Korean Hakseup, kind of what other organizing traditions and historical movements that it comes out of or that it's associated with? Because it's, I guess just for us to all appreciate what Hakseup is, and we also have political education, of course, but I think for us just to learn a little more about Hakseup in particular, I think that would be really great.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. But I don't think it's really only unique to Korean tradition or Korean movement either. Like, let's say if, we are doing let's say, Black Lives Matter movement, then I think we need to also look at what has been done, how does this, like, you know, the presence of the African Americans started? And then, you know, what are the contradictions, material contradictions that right now that they are facing? So Hakseup actually, well, how I experienced it in Korea was we study of the political economy, and then we go back to the history, and then revisit and reinterpret all of the historical events again. So then, you know, if we thought that we were told that, let's say, Gwangju massacre was done by the pro-North Korean commies, and it was a revolt, then now we know it was purely citizens uprising against the dictatorship. So then, you know, you need to kind of go by in the past. So this is it happens a lot in a political movement, any political movement, when bunch of us in a community, bunch of us get together. So, you know, I think our civil movement has a great tradition about, you know, we study about what Panthers did in the 60s, what their, you know, visions were. So we revisit when we are trying to do another, like, you know, community actions and work, we go back to what has been done. We do a study, we call it maybe sometimes, you know, power mapping or histories, or like, you know, the political revisit of the history, whatever we call it. I think we start with those Hakseup about the past, and then revisit the historical events with a view, with a lens of a very critical anti-imperialist lens. So it's like a doing, you know, so then we unlearn what we were told in the classroom or what we were told by the media. And then we learn it by looking at the power structures, political economy. Is it like international globalized community? How does this power played? You know, and then we redefine it. So much so that, I mean, in order for us to do that, I think, you know, we can be more empowered, because now we know that we can say there was an intervention of the imperialist powers into people's genuine native sovereignty. You know, if we name that, and then, you know, we go into say, now, what are we gonna do? What kind of action do we need in order for us to bring the peace on the Korean Peninsula? You know, so then the action plan would come. And then we'll say, what does it have to do with me? How does that relate to me? You know, so like, I think I do believe this like open syllabus or education done in the university is really, really great, because a lot of students get politicized, or they learn. And then, you know, maybe when they are coming to seek to do some action, or like what do we need to do, they are agitated enough, or they are uncomfortable enough to say, I need to do something. Then they come out and then seek out an organization like Nodutdol, or, you know, maybe other organizations in the field. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answered your question, Monica.
No, it totally does. And I think that, like, you brought up anti-imperialism, and I think that's a great, maybe we can follow that a bit more. I know that Tuyok and Tian also had some questions about, you know, how to do Hakseup in the belly of the beast, right? So Tuyok or Tian, if either of you.
Monica, could I just ask a follow-up question before we move to that?
Yeah, of course, of course.
So, you know, I was wondering, Juyeon, if you were speaking about in Korea, how you started doing Hakseup in Korea. And I was wondering if you think that you know, of course, like political education has been absolutely foundational to, you know, labor organizing. It's been foundational to all forms of anti-imperialist organizing, the Venceremos Brigade. You know, you can think about also, you know, the national democracy movement, you know, in the Philippines. You could think of so many different instances in which Hakseup has played a very critical role, and even some stuff that gets enfolded back into the academy, you know, you could understand in a way as political education, right? So the Combahee River Collective, you know, like stuff that gets taught, you know, comes from these different spaces. But I was wondering if there is a trajectory that comes from the democracy movement, the Minjung movement in South Korea, and if you could speak about that. And, you know, I can imagine that, you know, although we do Hakseup outside of formal institutional spaces, that there have been settings and times, historical periods in Korea where doing this kind of political education puts you at risk, enormous risk. Could you speak about that specific historical genealogy?
I don't know how far back we should go. But let's just say, okay, when let's just start with under the democracy movement. So, you know, starting from like 1948, there is a national security law that it's a very broad blanket law that says anything that threatens national security, you can be persecuted, you can be indicted, you can be arrested without fair trial even. You know, so most of the people who were into the democratization movement or fighting against the dictatorship, they were charged with threatening quote unquote national security. So these studies were like, you know, in a very secret. There was a notebook, people would write it, and then we would roll it, or we would handwrite it in a very tiny pieces, and then we would carry it. And if we were found or gets arrested, like any young person at the time in 1986 and early 1980s, with a big book bag can be arrested at any given moment without any reason. I got like, you know, yeah, I got arrested too, just by walking down the street when the rally is happening. And I had to argue like I was going to, like, you know, just jewelry shop, blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, I would anyway get arrested for it. And there were a lot of like strategic plans how to get to the demonstrations. So it was a little bit dangerous place, a time. And I think that also, like, you know, fueled our desire to do a Hakseup, actually study more, because it is really dangerous and you cannot really commit. You know, you only remember a person's name, a pseudonym, and you cannot really remember, because, you know, you never know when you get arrested and get tortured to say about, you know, who was the ringleader, or what they call it, ringleaders. And, you know, the case can get fabricated and all that. So it was a little bit of the political repression that kind of fueled our desire to study, and then try to memorize the text a little more, so that I can by heart tell other person what I read, and disseminate, you know, this. Yeah, that's the tradition. But that tradition actually comes from the Japanese colonial period too, you know, and all the freedom fighters up in the mountains, we were told that they were doing Korean studies, and then, you know, they had a Korean history books they handwritten all of that, and then because a lot of people didn't know, they were forbidden to use the Korean language. They would put it into like when they were marching, like they would put it on the person's back, and then they would march trying to read and memorize those a passage or two, like, when they were doing that. So it's a partisans movement tradition too. Yeah. So we draw. I mean, I think a lot of times when you are doing a political study, one thing that I would say is that a lot of people feel disempowered rather than empowered, because the enemy sometimes, the imperialist state, because it's an abstract term and it is a state and it is government, that it looks bigger than actually who they are, and then people feel like, oh, I'm just an individual. If you don't have an organizational backup, if you don't feel like you are solid in a network that can support you, you feel like, you are disempowered and you are powerless individual. That should not be the case, actually, right? So then, the reason that we always try to reiterate our tradition back into history is that, we have this long legacy that we are so proud of. And, we are the people who has made history so far against all these governmental repressions and oppressions, and, against all this political design that try to make us silent, but we have been keep rising up. That reiteration of our small victories and our glory, and make ourselves to be like, to know that we have a long, like, glorified legacy, is very important to maintain our own spirit when we are doing like political studies. Hakseup,
Juyeon, thank you so much. I'm, you're challenging me to re-examine my own perhaps too easy dismissals of what's been called, quote unquote, rote learning or memorization, and to really see the radical kind of potential of it within the context of anti-imperialist Hakseup. So I'm so grateful for all of the conversation so far. And, related to the discussion about empowerment and individual and collective approaches to anti-imperialist Hakseup, one of the questions that, I'm wondering about is if there are any specific experiences with unexpected or surprising transnational solidarities that you might share with us. Again, within the context of your work and organizing anti-imperialist Hakseup over, decades.
Okay, yes, there are a lot of a lot. Okay, so working on a Korea peace or true peace, permanent peace, radical peace, I have been also, I have heard or learned that, other like, liberation studies, liberation movements are related, because, our enemy is a common enemy and we should be working together more. So I went to Philippines, I went to Japan, Okinawa. I also recently went to Venezuela, I went Mexico and Bolivia to see, what other people's movement is like. And when I went to the Philippines, though, and I was visiting an area where Hanjin, a Korean company, had a shipyard. And one of the organizers said, Hanjin, although the US troops were supposed to be, like, the bases were gone, and they were not supposed to give any ports that Hanjin, because they had they rented the ship a couple of shipyards, and then they let the U.S. Navy ships to come in. And then I didn't know what to say. And I said, I am so sorry on behalf of the South Korea Minjung movement. I'll tell you that, you know, the South Koreans are fighting against these multinational corporations as well. And, you know, I stay in a good Korean side, although I live in the US. And I didn't know what to say. I was mumbling and fumbling, and I was trying to make sense of, like, what can we do? And then they said, so they contacted the KCTU, the labor union in South Korea. And now they are building and then working together with the South Korean union, actually, to stop Hanjin, to give a pressure, not only from the Philippine side, but also within the South Korea side. And although, like, they both had really busy schedules, and it was kind of hard that, you know, that connection is getting stronger every year. They are doing at least one joint movement together. And then also when I went to Okinawa, I learned that they have this tri-national islands solidarity building among people to people. Like, you know, the Okinawa is now working with the people in Jeju Island, and then with the people in Guam. So that's the triangle that they are creating. And then, you know, they were hoping that, you know, it can be expanded to Taiwan or like Philippine Islands and other places. But these three islands were working together for last 10 years. And then they were like, oh, do you know Seonghee? And I said, oh, I know Seonghee. So, you know, we can talk about that. When we have, so when we were working locally in, let's say, like, you know, Nodutdol is based in New York, and we feel like, you know, we are the only maybe Korean organization. Sometimes it's not true, but sometimes, you know, we feel like we are isolated. So we feel like we are the only small organization has to do with so many different things. And it's all on our shoulder to do it. But then, you know, if we go out, step outside and then go to these different trips and try to identify who are on the street fighting against imperialist, you know, US imperialist, then we meet already existing solidarity is already there. And then, you know, we can connect with them. Maybe we didn't know about it. So then, you know, we can learn, and then we can also work together with the existing solidarity network, or we can be part of that network. And which is also like very empowering experience when you see, yeah.
Thank you so much for those examples, and I appreciate too the moment of being at a loss, right? When you said you were mumbling and fumbling within the context of the Hanjin port in the Philippines. That's also perhaps part of what you were saying earlier about, you know, recognizing the discomfort, and that that's exactly perhaps part of Hakseup as well. I know Miriam and Elvin have had their hands up for a while. Please do ask your question.
I just wanted to make a statement. Juyeon's my old roomie from 2007, right? Yeah, so I just wanted to say a couple of different things. I consider Juyeon to be Korean American radical diaspora's Inkan Munhwaje, which is basically our intangible human cultural asset, which is the designation given to special kinds of embroidery, or, you know, how to make certain kind of instruments, those national treasures that belong to all of us and from whom we learn different skills. So I just want to appreciate that fact, and also appreciate the fact of the extra burden that falls on the shoulders of the bilingual comrades who are fluent in language, but also culture and history and politics, and kind of carry that back and forth between different worlds. I think the other thing about Juyeon and the work of Nodutdol and other organizations like that is it's the diaspora people to people diplomacy and love. And being with Juyeon with Deep in 2007, it's like it really struck me how, you know, people are always criticizing what's happening in North Korea. But for the North Koreans to listen, you have to have a long relationship with people. You can't, you know, they're not going to listen to some stuff from some different people who are new or have had a bad history themselves. They're going to listen to people that they've talked to and struggled with over the years. And I saw that happening there with Juyeon's work, very skilled people-to-people work, you know, the education that Nodutdol did, the teaching of Korean, how to sing Korean songs when we went over there for struggle. So it's an interesting function that, you know, if we were in a different level, there'd be bigger organizations that would be able to do that. But this is the struggling Korean American diaspora movement. And Juyeon and Hyun have shouldered a disproportionate amount of responsibility for our connection to movements in the South, as well as to the people in the North Korea. So much love.
Miriam, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. I was going to tease Juyeon, but I shouldn't. Because those of us who have been around Juyeon also know what it means to room with Juyeon.
Yeah. Anyway,
Okay,
I
never
think
mind.
Miriam just brought me some stories that I can tell actually about regarding the how Hakseup is connected to our work. Is that Hakseup has to do with the people's stories. You know, we cannot just learn a theory and expect that some people can transform ourselves. We need to learn. And, you know, so like having all these people, like Miriam and Belvin, like Eric in this room, or like, you know, Mari, or like, you know, Paul, Deanne, JT, Jiyeon, everyone can talk about the Korean American, I mean, our own, like, you know, the legacy in the US, the progressive movement, how to keep it alive. You know, they have experienced the 60s on 70s and 80s, and, you know, it's not only in the 60s, it has been continued, and they have carried on their lives to continue. And, you know, when I meet them and I hear their stories, or like I hear them, that the history lesson becomes live. So, okay, we read Suji Kim's book or Mari's book about North Korea, and then we go. When we go to North Korea, we need to hear people's stories, unmoderated stories, the real stories. But, you know, as I said, in 2002, when I did not have much of knowledge, or without the Hakseup, I would be like, is what they are saying true? Is this staged? You know, this is a common question, right? Are they waiting? I mean, they seem like they are ready to talk. Like these questions pop into your mind. Then, you know, you bring it up. You ask the same question over and over again to the different people. Like, I don't mind people asking all these different questions. And I said, that's a great question. Let's keep it alive. Let's go and then, you know, let's ask them, but in a very respectful way, you know. So I changed just the tone of it, but we asked directly, and we try to interact as many people as possible, and then get a raw account of what the stories are. So when we are learning about like, you know, the Gwangju massacre, it is important for us to hear the stories about the survivors or their experiences, but not just one, the most horrific one, but also the people who has been making through, you know, all different things that will make us, it becomes a sort of a living story with me. And that makes me gets transformed, I think. And then we become a new person, because, you know, we cannot just say, well, in accordance with my theory of transformation, like, you know, it doesn't sometimes work like that. But then, you know, you need to be a little bit more fluid. And then over the years, okay, I'm sort of not too old, but, you know, a little bit old, and I have seen people like, you know, from their 20s into the 40s, and people do change and they turn into a really beautiful, like, great comrades. Also, the people who, some people move away, and it's okay. The political Hakseup is just like, as any educators would agree, is like, you know, throwing seed into the wind and see where it lands. Sometimes a great tree will come out of it at a much later time. So, you know, I always feel like we are planting seed. We are throwing seed into the air. And then, you know, always pray that the best thing will happen. But that's beyond my control. So then let that go. But then, you know, put the seed into people's mind. Why are you so hung up on like the leadership of North Korea? Is that the only thing that we look at when you look at a country? Or are we trained or conditioned to only see that when we were talking about North Korea? Is there somebody who benefits from that question? And what is being blocked when we are asking those questions? I think that's the role of the facilitator, or who's leading this political Hakseup, is just keep asking questions. Who's benefiting? Who created that story? Why is that the image that it's first image and only image that you have? How about 25 million people who are trying to make every day a country that is good for themselves? What about people's sovereignty? What about their agency? You know, aren't there maybe a very smart people in North Korea who's trying to make things work for themselves? Wouldn't they know already of what we think we know about them? You know, these are the questions that I always pose before we go into the trip. I used to. I mean, I'm not the facilitator, the coordinator anymore. The coordinator is Betsy Yoon in this room right now. And, you know, I have been sitting in a back seat right now on a car and enjoying the ride. But yeah, that's another thing that I would like to say is that, you know, political Hakseup, that we always have to know, this is political stuff that we are learning is a people's story. It's people's conditions. It's directly connected to people. So like who? We need to meet them. We need to see them. We need to speak with them so that, you know, they become not as just a statistic or a number, but they are becoming a person next to me, you know, so that I can relate. We can relate to them like you and I. And that really brings you an impact, you know. So when I heard about another flood in 2009, I was so worried about, you know, Han 선생님, for example, who translated for me. I was like, I am not sure if her house was on a flooded area or not, you know, or like, you know, the fact that they don't get any pap test anymore because of the sanctions, it's sanctioned goods. Like all these women that I met in North Korea, they cannot even get a basic healthcare needs, then what's going to happen? Like that becomes a personal story, personal anger for you. Also, another thing is that, now I kind of lost my train of thought. Anyway, the role of a facilitator. The role of a facilitator is not the person who's going to give the knowledge, right? That's why I'm like, I am not an educator. I'm not a teacher. I don't teach people. I mean, what I know is so little compared to, all these great thinkers. But what I do is I question people. I challenge, I pose a challenge. What does that mean to you? Like, if people are very well aware about the current situations. Okay, but what does it have to do with you? What does it mean to you? Like, what does it mean to me? Like these questions, and then try to connect it to our reality. Where we stand, where they stand. Who are they? Who are we? Like, where is your line? Like these things has to be like posed and asked and challenged so that, to shake people up, to make people uncomfortable. Like if we are too comfortable, then there's no change, no transformation. We have to be uncomfortable. We have to be okay to be unstable. Am I going too fast? No response from the audience. Hello.
Hi, Juyeon.
Hi, Juyeon.
Hi, it's good to see you here.
Yeah.
So, you're talking about posing questions, right? And I'm wondering, depending on the audience, that can have a lot of different effects, right? So I'm thinking in particular about doing this kind of political education, this kind of Hakseup in a Korean American community that is still largely very anti-communist and very pro-American, right? Church career schools that show you the peninsula and say South Korea is our fatherland and North Korea is our enemy. Like I have had students tell me that's what they learned in their church career schools. So how do you handle those kinds of challenges, both within the Hakseup session and also externally from, community members and so forth who may be actively opposed to the sort of work that you and Nodutdol and fellow organizations are doing?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jian. Actually, that's a real question too, because we really are in a community where they are like very pro-US. Sometimes, when in 2003 we were going, some of the Nodutdol people and the allies were going down to DC to say the anti-war like demonstration, there was a national gathering. So we were going to attend, and then some Korean 할머니, the grandmas and grandpas came out with a banner said, "We love America." And then they blocked our bus because we were all gonna go into the same bus and then go down. So then, we finally had to call the NYPD, and then they kind of made a way for us to get onto the bus. And then we were like, we didn't say anything about we hate America. Like, why are you saying we love America? And then some lady said to me that because of you, that our relationship with the US government is being jeopardized. So we need to tell the US that, not all the Koreans are doing this. There are some Koreans that supports the US government. And I said, I don't think the US government would really care that you are saying that you love America, Who are you talking to? Like, and then they said, when I keep on the talking, then their logic becomes, well, where are your manners? You don't talk back to the older person, blah, 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 blah. So then, you cannot continue the conversation. I try to usually pick my battles. So hopefully in our Hakseup in Nodutdol, those people will not be. We actively try to like, what's the word? Try not to invite them into our space. But when I have to go to a public space and then speak, I use a very moderate languages. And I pose my question in a very interestingly like a murky way. So there were like when Father Moon Juyeon came, and then we did some tour in a university in the Bronx. What university was that? Anyway, a Korean American stood up. He actually was he was Iraq war veteran. And then he said, well, what do you think of North Korea? My grandpa was killed by North Korean soldier, with bamboo sticks. And my grandma says that during the Korean War, like, everyone had to, because there was nothing to defend themselves, they had to cut the bamboo stick and then, do these military drills with it so that they can fend for their own lives. And then, Father Moon said, well, that's the problem with the war. When war happens, a lot of people die. Not only the South Korea side, but North Korea side too. Like, we need to stop the war. And he just left at that. He didn't argue, are you sure there was a North Korean soldier? Or what area was your grandma was? Let's talk about like all the massacres that, US and South Korean soldiers did. Like, we don't go into so much of detail, but we leave it in a very general sense, because he doesn't want to listen. Even if we talk more, I don't know if he's ready to hear. Oh, that brings up another aspect of Hakseup, actually, that I was gonna talk about, and forgot, of course, it has to be a voluntary process. You should want to study. And that's a little bit different from a university setting, I think, is that I do not really enjoy too much of reading especially long, thick book. I'm sorry, Bruce Cummings is not here, right? I couldn't finish that Korean War book. It's 2 volumes, it's too thick. I just read a little bit of an excerpt. I asked, Christine, I said, where is it? Like, give me the specific pages so that I can just read that. I cannot hold but, when I want to know about the FTA, oh my God, the free trade agreement was another thing that I realized I know nothing about, and that was really important. So I had to read all that treaty. I had to know, that I did it because I wanted to know what other people are talking about. But then, I read all of that. So we need to there has to be a desire to know. And otherwise, you cannot make people. Right now, Nodutdol, I'm sorry, we have a lot of hard time in doing a political studies, because we think there is a bare minimum that people have to know. And the young new generation of members are like, TLDR. You know what that acronym means? Oh my God, I was so shocked. It's too long, didn't read. And they just say it as if it's a one important word, TLDR. I'm like, is that your comment, or what is that supposed to mean? They said, this is an expression that they need a 1-paragraph summary. I said, you give me a summary. I don't give you the summary. What are you talking about? And then, so Betsy had this painstakingly picked the YouTube video that is related. We have an audio podcast that people read the text to you, because some people said they are dyslexic. Is it dyslexic? So they cannot read you know, so then, you know, you can listen to it if you cannot read it. Like we try many different ways. Now it all are available amazingly. But, you know, you cannot really make everyone to read. I mean, you know, when we go to the keep, usually about what, 10 to 12, 15 people go. And only like a couple of people who does all the reading requirements, which like, you know, Christine and a lot of the scholars in this room painstakingly like build that our curriculum for KIP. Like, you know, I really read the structure. And then we delete all this requirement reading was like 3 books to now like 1 book and then 2 chapters. Just becomes a bare minimum and people don't even read. Or they read it, it doesn't stay with them. So when we go to trip and said, oh, do you remember this was on such and such a reading? And we try to make a connection. And they're like, was there a reading like that? How come we weren't told about this before? That makes, yeah, anyway, that gets you upset. I don't usually get upset because I know they would not remember. But most of the actual study happens after the trip, after the KIP. And then when they were moved and, you know, they now know personally, then they want to read again. They want to read about like, you know, this and that and history about the collective farms and, you know, then they will retain. So voluntary nature is a very, very important thing that we need to be motivated to know, motivated to learn. Now, so that's one of the worry is that now, before we didn't have a syllabus ready, like we actually had to dig a lot of materials. I had to create it. Now it's ready-made. I don't know if people will feel like how they would know how precious this is. How many people's like sweat and hours went into it. I hope that, you know, we will all like really cherish this syllabus and learn and use it, you know, for our political studies and our, you know, connection and building a stronger solidarity with other movements, other sectors. Like there is a lot of cross-sectional commonalities that we can find, and we have to be open to like expand our horizon and movement too. Yeah. Sorry, I went all over this.
No, it's okay. I want to ask you and Monica a question, or maybe put you in conversation, because you're just speaking about how Hakseup necessarily must be voluntary, right? And then I was trying to think about involuntary education, and Monica, in the Cold War, as you dispelled the sort of notion of brainwashing, right? And Monica is an amazing historian of the Korean War who's focused on the interrogation rooms of the Korean War. And Monica, you have demonstrated that what goes by the phobic name of brainwashing, this idea of political re-education in involuntary settings, you have dispelled that. I mean, there's political education that occurred in POW camps. And the political education often took the form not of, you must think like this, let me pound this into your head, but actually critical questions and questions aimed at reflecting, for example, on racism in the United States. You know, so I mean, I just wonder like what you know, North Korea is so demonized because of, you know, it's associated with a giant gulag, right? Political education is under, you know, re-education or political education is viewed so phobically. But I wonder if we could have some clarity, you know, just in a conversation, drawing upon your knowledge, Monica, about, you know, even the function of thinking about, you know, the criticality of even the education that occurred, for example, in Chinese and North Korean POW camps. And if you could speak to that, you know, I mean, you have done so much research into this, and I wonder what you think about that. You know, Juyeon, is there ever a time when involuntary Hakseup is possible? and or desirable, you know? But okay, sorry.
I don't know.
Oh, Juyeon, you can go ahead first.
No, you go.
Oh, well, yeah, in my research, and Juyeon knows a little bit about this since I've talked so much back when I was at NYU about the book. But I mean, the thing that was so stunning when I started doing my research on the North Korean and Chinese interrogation rooms was that the North Korean interrogators, well, number one, they spoke fluent English because they had usually studied in the US. So they could actually talk about race relations and class struggle in Detroit, Philadelphia, Chicago, LA. I mean, it's extraordinary. And they could do that also and connect that to Japanese colonialism, right? And so the key thing that I found that really differentiated the Chinese from the North Korean interrogators was that the North Korean interrogators always asked the US POWs, primarily soldiers of color, working class and poor soldiers, you know, what are your hopes and desires? And which opened up a whole kind of more horizontal, right, kind of relationship. And if the US soldier was a little too stunned to answer right away, the North Korean interrogator would say, I hope for peace, right? And would talk about what peace would look like on the Korean Peninsula. And it became an opening. They also knew W.B. Du Bois, Paul Robeson. They could speak about Black internationalism, right? I mean, it was really extraordinary. And it completely hit home for me. Like, how the hell was this happening in the early 1950s? And I didn't know about any of this, right? I mean, it just shows what happens with the closing in terms of the anti-communism, right? But the bigger story there is that when all the US POWs, when they decided to repatriate back to the US Counterintelligence Corps was the one who was interrogating all the US POWs about their experiences under interrogation. And so you have so many US POWs saying, I learned so much more about US capitalism and government and race with the Chinese and North Korean interrogators than I ever did in the United States, right? And the US military freaked out about this, and therefore they had to call that brainwashing, right? Another thing that North Korean and Chinese interrogators did, especially North Koreans in the beginning of the war, was to really encourage US POWs to actually get university degrees in political science, right? Then they really suggested political science first, or history, or, and then they told them specifically where to go in terms of learning how to do union organizing, right? So so yeah, you're right, Christine. I mean, this is a form of it was political education, not interrogation. And the whole point was the North Korean was going to figure out a way to decolonize the American, right? And that's what they were trying to open up. But yeah, so it's there's a genealogy there, right? In a really unexpected way, perhaps, for us to think about different, the genealogies of our own kinds of political education forms. But Juyeon, did you want to talk a little bit about, are there moments where, I think it's actually a really important question, like where involuntary, right? Political education, let's say, is important, or like, I don't know, like subversive political education or something like that.
I mean, does it have to be that you want to do it? I mean, because even that, there's a certain kind of level of, a certain kind of subscription to individualism. Like, I have the desire, maybe this is saying a lot about me, but I wonder about like when involuntary political education might not be, well, anyhow,
I'm sure there are some sometimes that we can, I mean, as I said, as a Nodutdol member, there is a bare minimum. What's bare minimum is a lot more than I think other people would expect, but still bare minimum that you have to go through, you have to read in order to be a Nodutdol member, I think, you know. So yes, and then also like we try to keep talking about it afterwards, refer to it. Like there are a lot of different ways that we can do the political education or Hakseup. And Hakseup is not like once, okay, let's just say like, okay, we read Mari's book. And that's done. So we push it aside is not a way. Like, you know, we keep revisiting it, referring to it, like, you know, we criticize it. Oops. Okay, Mari, we don't really, okay, we do criticize it. I'll tell you about it. But like, you know, we digest it again and again and again over the time. Then we make a reference to it so that we can do the soup pilots, like practice it and digest it and then make it like, you know, as a living knowledge. It's supposed to be 1 hour. I don't want to hold everyone too long. But Paul has a hand on too.
Okay, so we have, you know, we have 2 hours for this conversation, and
Oh, really?
Paul,
Okay.
yeah, sorry about that, Juyeon. I didn't know that. Okay, so Paul, yeah, please feel free to chime in. And there's a question from Sterling O. And Monica, what's the name of that film again? It's a CBC one about the POWs that decided to stay, or to go to China, like they chose China. Yes, okay, yes, exactly, they chose China. So that might be something to watch too. But it's always struck me as, yeah, you know, it strikes me as that's political education, you know, and then, you know, like if you think too about the kind of, when you think about these, you know, even some of Susie, I remember when Susie Kim was in a group called Cricket. I was part of it. Sorry, Paul, I'll yield the floor to you in just a second. But it was a critical Korean studies group at Berkeley when we were in grad school. And I remember she was just visiting. She visited and she was speaking about her research and just speaking about going through the archives that Bruce Cummings had combed through, that Charles Armstrong, and that all these people had combed through. And what had happened was in the first, in 1950, in fall of 1950, when the United States and South Korea pushed north, right? When they pushed north and occupied the northern part of the peninsula, it was the CIC, the Counterintelligence Corps, that did vast information scooping. So it's just like scoop, scoop, scoop. And they got a ton of stuff. And a lot of it, they didn't go back and filter very well, which is why Bruce Cummings found some really interesting stuff in that archive. But it's also the case that one thing that Susie was speaking about was that you could see what was happening with, you know, peasant farmers who were illiterate, and the kinds of records that existed of a pathway to literacy. So that one of the first orders of business for North Korea and the socialist revolution, it was, of course, land reform, for sure, but it was also education. So education became absolutely crucial. So you could sort of chart from, you know, someone who couldn't even sign their own name to someone who was taking a leadership role in the political process. And I just, you know, so I just, I can't remember why I was even saying this. I'm also terribly sleep deprived these days, but I just wanted to add that. Oh, you know, just about the kind, oh, I was saying this about like, and also you could see with, you know, like it's an earlier wave of feminism where there was that slogan that the personal is political, but the personal is definitely informed by the structural. And so that's also true for example, in China. You know, like you could also see a similar kind of process in which, you know, peasants were encouraged to reflect upon their own experiences as a basis for political education. You know, so if you were, you know, a peasant producer, you know, within a feudal system, you could extract from that self-reflection a critique of that kind of system, you know. So there's something to be said about all of this, but of course a lot of this gets demonized, you know. But Paul.
Well, I just wanted to give a shout out to what Juyeon was saying about not finishing reading books, because I don't either. And actually, I don't find actually a lot out there that has really been of interest to me. But, you know, kind of along the lines of having to do this kind of study voluntarily. I mean, I think like whenever I pick up a book, I will look this, there's always something I'm trying to understand, right? And so I tend to look at the table of contents, and then I'll skim, and then I'll go through directly to the, what do you call that? The index in the back, and I'll look to see if there are entries. And if I'm really not feeling it or seeing it, then I'll put the book down. I don't know if that's good or bad, but you know, when I went away to college, I got similar advice from my father, which is that if you're sitting down to write a term paper, you know, and you're going to read every book on the subject, you know, you might as well forget it. You know, you have to be you know, sort of very discerning about how you spend your time and what you read. And I also know, actually, Harry was also very frank about this too. He says the way you really learn things is that you have a burning question on your mind and you go out to answer it. And you don't answer it by trying to read every book on the subject. And it's the same thing with, you know, the popularity of Marxism in third world countries, is that the burning question on the minds of the movements, you know, was the national question, right? And it was actually, you know, the Soviet Union that was supporting national liberation movements. Everybody got interested in Marxism. It's not because people went to the bookshelf and randomly picked out this book. So, I mean, I think like, so I'm just saying to Juyeon, yeah, I understand, you know, what you're saying. And I also completely agree with you. And I also agree with, I also, you know, when you guys were presenting the categories of the, you know, your time frame, I mean, your pedagogy looking at the situation, you know, that's very attractive to me. I mean, because I've been like on a lot of websites, but these are the questions that I think are, you know, are most important to me. And that's why I would be interested, not that everyone, you know, who's interested in Korea will be, but I think like, and as Juyeon says, that it is, you know, it is, it's a very precious thing. So that's all I wanted to say. I don't read much, no.
You know, it's so fun. It's like, I don't read much either. I really don't. No.
Lie.
No, I'm totally
Yeah,
serious.
yeah. Okay.
I'm totally serious. Okay, Betsy and Youngho. No, it's so like I don't, because like I just don't read. I don't have time.
There's so many people in this group shaking their heads to that.
No.
But
Yeah.
That's because they can't
Stop it.
believe that academics don't, but like actually I don't read.
The question about involuntary versus voluntary political education is very interesting to me. And I think like part of what will become essential if we are to like transform this society is to like have folks develop a sense of engagement. Like I think Juyeon was saying before that like living under dictatorship in South Korea, like it was not optional to engage in those political studies. That was like necessary for survival. And I think here there's like a very strong sense of alienation. And so like, and the structures that we live in, like capitalism, doesn't make it so that people can choose to explore that if they want to. So like, you know, there's this balance of like political education is necessary to like develop, to create the change we wish to see, but we also need to create changes to make political education more available, you know, and like, and have it. And I think the thing about like what Monica was saying about the North Korean interrogators is like they were like very politically engaged in like in questions, and they saw this as like part of something that they like, part of their purview of something that they could like talk about, engage with. And I just know like that the political apathy and lack of engagement here in this land is by design. And so like part of our task, I guess, is to make it so that like people will feel that their political education is like a mandatory part of like constructing a society that we all want to live in, and constructing like something that's human-centered. And so I don't know how that happens, but like we have to like mobilize people to engage in political education as well, the other things, and make it understood how mandatory it is. And as you know, as Paul and Juyeon were saying, it doesn't have to be books. It can be other things, and it can't only be books. It has to be through dialogue and engagement too. So, yeah.
Thank you, Betsy. Young-ho?
Oh, hi. Can you hear me? Okay. Oh, yeah. I just want to say I'm really thankful for this space. I'm really learning a lot. I think my question is more about like your work in the community and the notion of relationship building and trust, and how they really fit into Hakseup and the notion of storytelling. And I think like, Juyeon, when you talk about these stories that you talk of they're so important because they really translate this affect of lost kinship and community that's really layered so much by silences and like fabrication of how we're supposed to feel and think when it comes to Korean division, right? And I also, and because of that, I feel like sharing these stories can be felt without, it can't really be felt without some semblance of community. So like, I going back to like, you know, last session, like the last conversation when I think Monica was your answer to Sung's question. It takes time to build relationships, right? And I also think it takes time to build trust too, you know. And I don't know, as I was listening, I was thinking about Crystal Beck's work, you know, another member of the teaching collective, her work on like orality and ethical oral history, and this seemed to be kind of like, for me, the starting point as we're met by like really limitations of like, you know, imperial constructions, like borders, cultures of division, authoritarianism, militarism, and stuff like that. So like, I don't know, I'm just listening to it, I'm just asking myself, like, how can we like listen for affect? And especially those of us who are academics, right? Like, how can we do that ethically in solidarity without like the walls of the institution, you know, and the disciplines that really serves to extract and never build? And I think that's something that's very missing and difficult to balance in academia, where it's just about us. It's like, oh, this is like information that I can use to write my dissertations. That's going to be a book, but like, you know, it's way more than that, right? So like, I'm kind of thinking in terms more of community. So maybe you can kind of speak on that a little.
Is that my area of speaking, or I think Monica, Christine, and Juok and Jiyeon can speak more, or Mari. I think there is what I have been blessed actually was that I had so many quote unquote, I'm not sure if they want to be called this way, but scholar activists who actively seek out the connection with us, with me. Like, or when I tap into them, or like say, hello, I have a question. Or could we work with Hunter College, NYU, or wherever the institution, and do this event together? like they were always willing and, try to find the ways to do so, so that there is a grassroots organization, or there were a bunch of the young people were trying to do something. They always like hosted everything, like, and then made the connections. I think so that academia does not have to stay as an academia or ivory tower, like among like this wilderness. It can be within the center of a community, and connect. It can be a resource center for actually the people who are actually lost. Like, people in this nowadays, I think the young people, they have so much more access to different ways of communication. I mean, the resources. So, but in your 20s, it's really, there are so many things are going on. Families, friends, and love, and making a living or future, like everything becomes a pressure for you, and they are kind of lost and more alienated, and there are too much pressure of like from the consumerism, from the capitalist. I mean, we say as an expression, living in the belly of the beast. But how hard is living in the belly of the beast? It's really painful experience for us, I sometimes feel like, people living in North Korea, you don't know how hard it is to, make a living and do an activism and, do this work and support the family. And, I can make a long list of things, and you just, whatever you do is a revolutionary path, and let's go to the revolutionary path together. Okay, good for you. But for me, it's a real hurdle. Like, we have to, but so we can support though. That's why I think it is really important for us to find this collective, and we have this teaching initiative and teaching collectives, and you need to really make connections and utilize one another. And I think building relationship unfortunately takes a long time. So we just start day by day. Like this day, a day will become a year, and a year will become 10 years very soon.
But Yongo, you're so right. I mean, the trust component, Miriam was speaking about rooming with Juyeon, and, like it is, I have seen, it takes a lot of time and energy to dedicate your focus to other people, and, in the wake of all these successive groups of people going to North Korea, Juyeon is the one who would call them, who would go out there and visit. She came out to visit me. She visited other, I saw it happen time and again. And that work of relationship building, not everyone does it. Not everyone bothers to do it. Not everyone sees it as something precious and valuable, And so it is something very distinctive that Juyeon, who doesn't want, she's like, shut up. She doesn't want me talking about this, but it's something very, very precious that she does. Yeah. Other people, actually, let me see, Yuna, I was looking for you. Did you want to pose a question?
Yeah. Thank you, Juyeon, so much for your thoughts. I've been just cannot explain enough how inspired I am. Because I do see myself as an activist and also a scholar, though I'm a student. Your talk makes me think about what Hakseup is as a concept, as a notion, as a theme that should be reflected upon over and over and brought to our everyday life practices. To help us think more, can you tell us a little bit more about how you reflect on some key changes or developments in the way you have organized Hakseup over this time?
Well, if I speak in terms of KIP studies, like when I when I went to North Korea 2002, we were just given one book to read, and then there was nothing. So, and I said it was a really not a great experience for me. So then I was thinking about how to improve it. And I said, I need to learn about their political system, their election system. I want to know, what do I want to know? And then I asked the people, like, is there any book or articles about these topics? So I collected a few. And then Wolsan was also with me in 2004. So she gave me a really long list of Bruce Cummings books. And, I was like, I can read all of this, whatever, TLDR, summarize for me or like whatever. So we made a list and then we read. And then I realized not too many people really read. And then I wanted to make a KIP program to be, there was an attempt to make it a little more easier for other like people in the diaspora to come, not only all the activists. So I was like, oh, this long list of readings are not gonna work. So then, we took a self-claimed rock star too in 2006, right? Miriam, 2007, yeah, rock star. So like, she didn't read much of the things. But what the goal of making people uncomfortable or challenge. But then the rock star actually had a really great anti-imperialist perspective. She was very critical about the role of the US plays in a globalized community. Like she didn't believe the US was such a great, like, she said, we are an agent of the consumerism. Like whatever we do, like, so we have to be careful when we are going into the third. She was the one who told me, like, you can have a really great perspective without really resorting to a political theory. But there were a lot of interesting things. What nowadays, what I think that the changes were like, heavily onto the giving a knowledge and information prior, now to a really people make people think critically, I guess, or they should come clean about what they know already. So if, let's say, I need to build a trust with the people among the participants to be able to say, I agree with that, but I don't think that North Korea is really a socialist state. But I want them to be able to say that so that, we can address it during the trip or post-trip or before the trip. So, I try to be very transparent about what I believe it's really important, and then other things are not what are not important to me, so that people can talk to me. If they have questions, we say there is no silly questions or stupid questions, but I do think that people do feel discouraged to ask questions that feels so basic. And I want to be the one who people can pose any questions. So I try to work on that too, I guess, usually personal relationships or like, the affinity usually works in a, but sometimes it's a block, because now I think, I don't know. That's always a valid question. Like how much of an relationship do I build? I don't know, Betsy can talk about it, but nowadays I have a little bit of a harder time to connect with the newest member of Nodutdol because I don't know. I think they think I'm too old maybe, or too experienced. I don't know. But to be able to keep asking questions, to be able to engage in a conversation is a very important, I think, so that we know what their questions are. And I always try to give a lot of I don't think that really works, but a lot of encouragement too. Like, when people ask a question, I react a little bit more on you can see how exaggerated I am about my reactions. I love it. Like, excellent, I say. Or like, I have a lot of hand motions, especially after the COVID. I'm like, I speak with my body, entire body, like, I love that question, like, and I try to be like questions. Yeah, those. But other than that, I don't know. It's a good question. Let's keep it alive. Let's keep asking, like, how do we make a changes? Like, how can we make this process of Hakseup to be more transformative? Like, it could be different from people to people, I think. Whoa, all of a sudden I see so many hands.
And
we have 20 minutes,
We only have 20, we only have 20 minutes. So could we just do could everyone pose their questions? So JT, Betsy, Spencer, and then Monica had the closing question for us. So let's actually, Monica, why don't you pose it as well? You know what I mean? So we don't lose sight of it. Okay.
Okay.
I just speak, or do you mean like put it in the chat?
No, feel free to speak.
Okay. Yeah, so I kind of have a more, I guess, kind of shifting away from like Hakseup. I just have a general question about us doing kind of advocacy work, especially within like the Korean community. So I'm in Canada, I'm in Vancouver, and I do a lot of like racial injustice work at my school and stuff. And I find that I get so much resistance from other Asians, especially among other Koreans, that it's one of the most discouraging things that I constantly feel like, why am I even doing this when I'm getting attacked within even my own community? I was curious, is this like a Canadian, Korean, Asian phenomenon? Does this also happen in the US? Why do we do that? What's going on? Is it something about this unending war that's created some weird psychosis in us that we just keep shooting each other down before we could even get out the door? Am I crazy that I feel this way?
Thank you. So we're going to integrate all of the questions just in the interest of time. JT.
Hi, mine's not so much a question as a comment that I think in doing political education, it's not a one-time shot, right? It's something that you do your whole life, and you come back to it, you find that you didn't get it the first time, you'll get it maybe 5 years later. And part of what I think our role is to at least initiate the thought in people. So maybe they don't hang with it and they go away, but hopefully it's changed their minds in terms of thinking in the future. And we maybe won't see the results right away. The other thing is that even though in talking about the changes in our Hakseup in terms of using more media, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a really good thing. And I think even the first day of this institute showed how well using media will provoke thoughts. And so a lot of those people may not have read any of the articles beforehand, but now they probably will because they'll be provoked to think about it. So I'm all in favor of integrating that into our education. So that's it.
And JT is with Third World Newsreel. And so if you're looking for, films that you want to teach, check it out. And then JT is such an incredible filmmaker and has made consequential films that we incorporate into our study. Betsy, Spencer, and then Monica.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to Juyeon's response to Yoona Kim about how the studies have changed. I think something that I learned throughout the studies is that it's not enough to just teach history. And it's not enough to be like, this is what happened, and then like draw your own conclusions. So some of the stuff that we study, like what Juyeon was saying, was like the basic stuff that everyone has to know, is like things like, you know, ideological frameworks like Lenin's imperialism. And so once we have that framework, when we're reading like Marty's book, especially the first couple of chapters that are like demonstrating really like the systematic nature of imperialism against the backdrop of understanding like Lenin's breakdown of like how imperialism functions, like it really adds like a second level. And so like it's not enough to just, you can have two people reading the same historical text and come back with like two totally different things. So you also need to have like an ideological component.
Yeah, it needs critical framing, you know, so there has to be some, you know, criticality. And it's hard to do that, like if people are just left to their own devices, because study occurs in social settings. I mean, for those of us who were present yesterday for the discussion of Harry Chung, it was within, you know, I mean, look at the lifetime of friendships between people who met at Antioch and studied with Harry and have been lifelong friends, you know, and so there is that, you know, earlier that there was a mention of people to people, when, you know, people to people sort of dimension in terms of, you know, we're thinking about like between nations and societies, but it's also just, it's truly between people, you know what I mean? There's that cannot be discounted. Spencer.
Hi, well, thank you all for this. It's been wonderful, especially thank you to Juyeon. I guess my question's kind of more around the point you raised up with the Hakseup, on how like it was a practice that was done, especially through repressive times, going back to Japanese colonialism, going back to the democracy movement. And I'm just wondering what you think the role of Hakseup will be in like the future of America, and even just with the presidency of Yoon Suk-yeol, who I don't know that much, but I know he's a hawk. So I'm assuming there's going to be some added repression. So I guess I'm just curious about where you think Hakseup slots into these times where political repression may heighten. Thank you.
Okay, and then our closing question, Monica.
Okay, I'm going to read the closing question, which actually ties back to something that Betsy had brought up in our previous session. So it's about radical peace. So throughout today, we have been discussing how the irresolution of the Korean War continues to impact communities through myriad forms of violence. Juyeon, from your experience as an activist, what have you come to envision as a radical peace on the Korean Peninsula and beyond? For example, we could have an official peace treaty on the peninsula that still relies on the hyper-militarization in the region. What do you believe is necessary in order to work towards a radical peace?
Okay, so this is a test for you, Juyeon. We've just thrown a bunch of balls at you and to see how you could juggle them all together. But yeah,
my first response
is happens when we invite people, right?
Yeah. That's right. Well, yeah, okay. So just to reaffirm, so Rhee, you are not alone. Something's wrong with the Koreans, or Korean diasporic Koreans, especially. I think we are kind of there is a lot of the baggages that was inherited to us because of war and unending war, and because of the unresolved colonialism, and because of the infrastructure right now that is under semi-colonial neoliberal structure. And then the fact that, you know, we believe that we migrated for our own safety. That diasporic communities are formed because of the war and imperialism. and that these isolated people are trying to find solace in recreating their safe space. So that this is a very like sometimes counter progressiveness, counter revolutionary or counter, it's a reactionary group. So we live in a very reactionary group community that's outwardly, I think. So we have a lot of things to work on. We need to really work on, or we need to really understand what is the colonial remnants or residues that people are still dealing with. And then, what does it mean to be under imperialist, like what does it mean to live in a belly of the imperial US, I guess, and then you need to also think about what are people afraid of? Why are they attacking you? What are they exhibiting or saying when they are attacking you? There is a fear. My father also said when I first went to North Korea, he said, now my social security is gonna be cut off because of you going to North Korea at this time. And I said, it has nothing to do with your social security, Dad, He said, don't underestimate CIA. They know everything. They're gonna track me down now. And you are putting me in a jeopardy. And I said, okay, and then I just went and I came back with a liquor bottle that was something of a like wild berry liqueur. And we don't drink. I cannot drink at all, actually. So it just stayed in my, cabinet. And then I saw him boasting it to a neighbor that this is from North Korea, Not everyone can get this. And that's exactly what the state of our community is, actually. They are afraid because of a possible persecution that is not actually tangible to them. It's an imaginary, but it leaves that fear because of the national security law, and people have been witnessed what happened during the military dictatorship, that the fear is very vivid to them, or almost visceral to people's psychic as a collective. But actually, it's unfounded fear, unfounded fear. It's not logical, and they know it's not logical. So that we have to kind of work through it. It's sometimes, I understand that it is frustrating, and I don't think, I can say, I know. I don't know how things are right now. So, you can talk to any people here. I think they will all understand. We all went through some sort of persecution, some sort of governmental repression, some sort of a community backlash. And it is very, very important, though, we keep doing it. You need to have a conviction and pride that you are connected to these wonderful people and our legacy of doing the right thing, Yeah. There is a 연자제 too. Oh, that's another serious thing. So we understand, as a Korean diasporic community, we understand what it is to be subject to this community backlash, I guess. And going back to Spencer, I think Hakseup can be creative, and it is related to every movement and every people. And as although I really agree with like, you know, what Betty said. We need a framework. We need a lens. We need to have a correct lens. So to view the past history. But, you know, when it is almost the innate instinct for us. Like when you are starting a new project, like even a new business, for example, you will see what the markets are like, what has been done before, what is the need, what are people's demands, and then you're trying to meet with it. So, you know, if I would, like right now, design a Hakseup for me, I would be like, what are my interests? What do I need to do? What speaks the most to me and my, like, you know, my surrounding, my friends, my collective community. And then, you know, you would see what has been done. What's the cause? Who wrote this about this? You know, if let's say you're really interested in working on Korea peace, I would go into this open access, open syllabus. You know, now you have it. Or, you know, if this is like a radical feminism, then there is another syllabus available, or Standing Rock. Like there are available resources. So you know, we start with the one, and then we say, oh, this is not good. Then, you know, we discuss among you with your dongjis, or your comrades or your colleagues, and then say, what can we implement more? You know, what can we try? And then be open, do this and do that, and then, you know, talk to elders in the community. Because their wisdom we can draw, their research, their reach, their experiences, what worked for them. I would not take though for granted. What worked for me may not work for Betsy. So, you know, in different situations, but, you know, we can always have this rich references that we have. So we tap into it, and then we learn, and then we design again, and we go about it. And then when we are down, I called Paul and said, can I come over? Like, you know, I need a little bit of a pat on my shoulder, like, you know. Or I would call JT and then start yelling and screaming. Like, this does not work. I don't understand. You know, this type of, like, I have I am really blessed actually to be in a very loving, like, communities and colleagues and my comrades, my dongjis, my teachers, my mentors. Like, I reach out to people and I said, I don't know what to do. I am very, very down right now. You know, I am down sometimes. And I know how to back up, how to get encouragement from people. And then, so radical peace is, I don't know. I don't know if I should answer this question. Well, but I will ask you a question. How about that? What are peace? If war ends, if there is no bullets pointed at each other, does that peace? If, let's say, we have a peace treaty, but if we continue the military exercises, do you call it Korea has a peace now? Or if how about, let's just think about, how about sanctions? How about economic blockade? Is that a war? Is that a peace? Because there's no weaponry involved. Do we call it peace? The concept, okay. So, and or like, let's go even further. I go outside, and if I am afraid that somebody may just attack me because of my skin color, is this a state of peace? If in the US, we are worried about police brutality, are we living in a peaceful society? What are the concept of peace? What is definition of peace? Are we talking about, like, I'm not really talking about a person's state of mind. That I think great people have talked about it. I'm talking about in a political sense. How do we define peace? Is the US a peace, inner peace? So, or if I cannot, I lost my house, and if I am on the street and I don't know where I'm gonna sleep the next day, is that peace? So that I think, I call it, so when we are talking about the radical peace, I think there is we have to think about how do we transform this society? This society, not only Korea. And I think, a lot of times people ask, oh, so Nodutdol does work on the Korean peace on the Korean peninsula. And we try to answer, that has a lot to do with changing the society in America. Without changing the US, without transforming the US society, the Korea will never be in a true permanent peace. Or without really working on true Korea peace, the US will not be really, So I will not use that big R word, but when we declare to be a peacemaker, you have to also think the concept of peace in a broadest sense, but you cannot be working all fronts on a same time. You have to choose your area, unfortunately. But your area, very narrow as it may be really connected to the changing the entire society. So yeah, that's something that we really seriously have to think about. So I'm just going to be a little bit give a little bit of a prop, I guess, for the exposure trips, like, what we call like political journey, tourism. I am really in favor of that, actually. However, we need Hakseup before we go. You need to have, I am the person who needs to know, because I cannot just go, especially if I don't speak the language. I will be like, oh, this is great. Oh, people are really working hard. What other things will I be learning? So we need to know about the structure, about how this society functions, at least, right? But then, in order for us to think about backwards, how about that? If we are to receive a delegation from North Korea, let's say they are youth delegation, where would you like to show? What would you say about US? What would be the most symbolic place, important place that they have to see in the US? And why? If you think about that, then maybe the answers will tell you what you think about what's your areas of interest, or what you really need to think about, what we are focusing on. I think has a lot to do with it. But I especially encourage you to travel yourself, to go to our quote unquote enemy states of the US, because hey, it's a great places to visit, to open our eyes and to be uncomfortable, actually. Okay, I think I can wrap this up at that. Yeah.
Juyeon, thank you so much for this closing conversation. It has been amazing, really wonderful. And you've done the work of a Hakseup facilitator by providing us with a question that we will continue to come back to. And I just wanted to just thank everyone. Some of you have been taking part in, the Summer Institute from the very first day, and just thank you for coming along on this ride. We will follow up with a survey to you to ask you what you liked about it, what didn't, certain questions like that, so that we could take that feedback into consideration. Above all, we want this to be free, and we see the Zoom format as enabling a wide variety of people to be able to join. And do you like that format? Did this work for you? Was 3 days too long? Was it not enough, etc.? And, as I mentioned before, we will be having a Summer Institute every other year. That is provided that we're able to secure funding. So it's always a scramble within the institution. However lavishly this may appear to be funded, or US universities more generally, it is nonetheless still a scramble to secure the funds to run things like this. So provided that we are still here, and we hope to be, we hope to see you in 2024, and many of you far sooner. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. If you would like to be involved in the syllabus project, if there are further conversations you'd like to have, if you have feedback for future conversations, future Summer Institutes, please do put that in the survey that we will circulate to you all. And I thank, everyone who was part of the organizing team for this. I thank all these people who are in this room, who many of you I've known for so many years. I really thank the people in KPI who supported a lot of the work that went into the organizing of the last 2 days in particular. And yeah, thank you once again. It's so heartening to be sharing this space with you. And, we'll just look forward to seeing each other again. Yeah. Juyeon, thank you. Thank you so much.